in order to be here on the couch rocking President's Day.
No cold's going to bring me down.
That's absolutely.
I am looking forward to the Democratic primary this year. I'm looking forward to springtime, and I'm looking forward to a hot toddy after the show.
Oh, yeah. Carly's first time
Short
on the couch.
long-term goals. Great job, Carly. Your first time on the Outnumbered couch.
Happy to be here. This is a lot of fun.
Yeah, this was great. And now we rejoice in an hour well spent. We're going to be back here at noon Eastern tomorrow. Here's Melissa Francis in for Harris.
Fox News alert: political and legal battles mounting in the wake of President Trump's national emergency declaration, setting up for a fierce fight ahead. This is Outnumbered Overtime. I'm in today for Harris Faulkner. Democrats slamming the president's use of executive power, and California and other states announcing plans to sue over the declaration. But the White House is strongly defending the decision. Here's Director of Strategic Communications Mercedes Schlapp this morning.
We feel that we're in strong legal grounds and in pushing forward and declaring this national emergency. It is the obligation of this president to provide the safety of Americans in the United States, and he's upholding his duty.
But Democrats aren't backing down. Senator Tammy Duckworth criticizes the move this weekend.
Frankly, I think there's enough people in the Senate who are concerned that what he's doing is robbing from the military and the DOD to go build this wall. That, you know, it's really not even the best way to fight the crisis that he's talking there, you know, seeming that there's one at the border.
Let's go live to Chief White House Correspondent John Roberts for more. John.
Melissa, good afternoon to you. And it is President's Day, and there are a lot of people who are not at work today, and many of them have taken to the streets of cities across America. You can probably hear somebody in a bullhorn behind me. MoveOn.org has got a day of protests across the nation planned. This one going on in Lafayette Park, directly across the street from the White House. White House officials, though, insist that the opposition to the president's emergency declaration is purely political. Here's Stephen Miller, the president's chief policy advisor, on Fox News Sunday yesterday.
I guarantee you this. If Donald Trump had said he's invoking the National Emergency Military Construction Authority to build a security perimeter in Iraq or Afghanistan or around a military installation in Syria, there would not have been one word of objection from Congress. This is defending our own country.
You mentioned some lawsuits that are on the way. Public Citizen has already filed a lawsuit. The ACLU and California Attorney General Xavier Becerra and others are planning on bringing lawsuits against the declaration. Democrats in Congress planning legislation after they return from this week's recess to block the declaration as well. Here's the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Adam Schiff, talking about that.
This is the first time a president has tried to declare an emergency when Congress explicitly rejected funding for the particular project that the president is advocating.
White House officials believe that they are on solid legal ground with the emergency declaration, that White House attorneys and attorneys at the DOJ spent weeks going through all of this, and that if Congress does pass legislation to block it, the president may veto that legislation. That would be his first veto. Now, keep in mind that about half of the money that's been identified by the president so far can be gotten without that emergency declaration. And this is money from the Treasury Department's forfeiture fund. It's money that's included in anti-drug efforts from the Pentagon. And then there are some other pots of money that have to be either transferred over using reprogramming authority, or then when you get to the military construction money, that is money that needs to be tapped using the emergency declaration. Here's what Mercedes Schlapp from the White House said earlier about how the president can get access to that money.
In those pots of money, we can start building immediately. We can start working with our contractors. The president met last week with a general from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to get this process going. The president wants to move fast. He recognizes that this problem has been festering for decades.
So, Melissa, when you look at these various pots of money, he's got the $1.37 billion that he's got from Congress. That is to build 55 miles of fencing. Then he's got about $601 million from that Treasury forfeiture fund. He can get that immediately. And then he's got about $300 million that's currently in the anti-drug Pentagon fund. Those pots of money really nobody else can touch, and they can't really argue too much about it. But when the president starts to reprogram money from the DOD, and that's about $2.2 billion, that's when Congress will likely start to get upset, because many members of Congress want that money in their own district. And then when he goes after the military construction budget, Katie, bar the door. Melissa?
No, absolutely right. John Roberts, terrific analysis there on that. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Coming
Melissa.
up, we have more on our top story with former Special Assistant to President Trump, Mark Lauder, who is now a member of the Trump 2020 Advisory Board. I'm going to ask him if he thinks declaring a national emergency was the right move with respect to the 2020 campaign. That's about 15 minutes away.
The discussion of the 25th Amendment was simply Rod raised the issue and discussed it with me in the context of thinking about how many other cabinet officials might support such an effort.
Former acting FBI Director Andrew McCabe in an interview on 60 Minutes last night saying Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, he floated the idea of secretly recording and potentially removing President Trump from office. Now the president is lashing out, tweeting today, quote, "Wow, so many lies by disgraced acting FBI Director Andrew McCabe. He was fired for lying. Now his story gets even more deranged. He and Rod Rosenstein, who was hired by Jeff Sessions, another beauty, looked like they were planning a very illegal act and got caught." Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge is live in Washington with the latest. Catherine.
Well, thanks, Melissa, and good afternoon. When you take a deep dive, there are inconsistencies between McCabe's 60 Minutes interview and congressional testimony by the FBI's former top lawyer over how far discussions went on the 25th Amendment. On 60 Minutes, McCabe said the Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein raised the issue in a preliminary way.
Rosenstein was actually openly talking about whether there was a majority of the cabinet who would vote to remove the president.
That's correct. Counting votes or possible votes.
Did he assign specific votes to specific people?
No, not that I recall.
This video from October shows former FBI General Counsel James Baker, who worked alongside McCabe and was part of those discussions. He testified behind closed doors about the conversations with McCabe and another FBI lawyer about what exactly Rosenstein said. Baker told House investigators he believed Rosenstein's 25th Amendment efforts went further. Fox News has confirmed sections of the Baker transcript. Quote, "I had the impression that the Deputy Attorney General had already discussed this with two members of the president's cabinet and that they were on board with this concept already." House Republicans who tracked the testimony from McCabe and other senior FBI and DOJ officials for over a year say the former acting director said he had grave concerns about President Trump, yet he still wanted to be the head of the bureau after his old boss, James Comey, was fired by the president.
Andy McCabe was one of 4 people to walk into the Oval Office and interview with Donald Trump to become the FBI director. So how do you go from, I think you're an agent of the Russian government committing treason, to 8 days later, I think you're an agent of the Russian government committing treason, but I'd sure love a job working for you every day.
McCabe also told 60 Minutes that the conversations about Rosenstein wearing a wire ended immediately, saying Baker had a, quote, heart attack over the proposal. But Baker testified under oath that the wire discussions went beyond one meeting, lasting a couple of days. And for context, that transcribed interview with Baker behind closed doors on Capitol Hill, if he lied or misled investigators, there are criminal penalties for doing so in that case, Melissa.
Thank you for setting that table for us and putting all the facts out, because we're going to follow up on that right now, Catherine Herridge. Let's bring in Republican Congressman Andy Biggs of the House Judiciary Committee. So that is, of course, the same panel where former FBI lawyer James Baker testified last fall about the senior DOJ officials' discussions about invoking that 25th Amendment, which Catherine Herridge just said. So let me ask you, sir, how does what we heard from Andrew McCabe on 60 Minutes track with what James Baker told your committee?
Well, I think with what James Baker said, one got the impression that this was really serious. This was an active effort, and it was an effort to subvert the will of the American people. It was a conspiracy in some respects. And what Mr. McCabe said in 60 Minutes yesterday, what I got from that is that it was kind of preliminary, not as serious as one came away. I mean, look, you come away from the James Baker testimony, you're saying this was really serious. They were seriously considering taping or wiretapping the president, and that there would be people that might have already been contacted in the cabinet to see if there was the will to invoke the 25th Amendment. That's the difference. I think McCabe's kind of downplaying it a little bit, but Baker really did not downplay it at all. It seemed very serious.
What were James Baker's sources when he was talking to you? I mean, was he hearing this information from McCabe? Was he hearing it from Rod Rosenstein? I mean, I know Lisa Page was a piece of that too. Who was he hearing all this from?
His testimony indicated it was McCabe and Lisa Page. And Lisa Page, don't forget, was the attorney for McCabe. And they would have been right there, and then of course it becomes hearsay because they had talked to Rod Rosenstein, and I don't recall Mr. Baker saying that he'd heard it directly from Rosenstein.
If you listened to that interview last night, I mean, one of the things that really struck me was that McCabe really hung it all on Rod Rosenstein. You know, he was like, I was sitting in this room and I thought, how did I get here? You know, that really Rosenstein's the one that's almost thinking out loud about this idea of invoking the 25th Amendment. And, you know, kind of drawing McCabe in. Is that the way the picture was kind of painted to you guys in the committee by James Baker, or is this kind of like a new way of framing things?
That's not really the way I took it from the Baker testimony. I took it really that Rosenstein was a big instigator, but that McCabe was in there as well. So don't forget that anything that Andrew McCabe says is now taken with suspicion, because he's a proven liar. He's a known liar, and so his credibility is always going to be questioned. And so I'm trying to figure out why he's kind of softening anything, but what he's softening really is always his role in what was going on. That's what he's doing, and that seems consistent with someone who hasn't really been truthful or honest to his own agency and to the American people.
It's also true, you know, so in the interview last night, he sort of backed away from, you know, who were these other two people in the cabinet who had been reached out to or who were in theory on board potentially with the idea of removing the president. He said, oh, I don't know, you know, and when, as we heard from Catherine Herridge, you know, it sounds like James Baker thought it was a much more advanced on that front. Do you think he knows who the two people were? Do those two people really exist? Was that, I don't know, how do we find that out? What was your impression of that situation?
Well, I think you're spot on. I think Baker indicates very clearly that this is a very serious thing. It's ongoing. He talks about the discussions for Rosenstein wearing a wallet was taking several days, and he implies, or he doesn't imply, he states that he understood that basically Rosenstein's already counting votes. Yeah. On the other hand, McCabe is basically saying, look, you know, I don't know what was really going on. He said it. I don't know. He's kind of, again, softening what was happening. But in any way you look at it, this is a really serious situation, probably unprecedented in American history, maybe the biggest scandal in American history, where you've got the highest levels of the police state talking about ways to effectively overthrow the elected president.
Real quick, did they clarify why? Because that was another thing I noticed last night. He didn't say because of collusion with Russia or because he was, he just said his capacity, his intent as president. But did James Baker say it was because of the Russia thing or because of they thought he was, you know, crazy, or what was their reasoning for removing the president?
Well, what I took from it is quite frankly, is that they were upset regarding the relationship of the president with Comey and Comey's firing. Okay. That they viewed that as indication that he's not capable of governing. Okay. So,
Congressman Andy Biggs, thank you for coming on. Appreciate it. Great
Thanks,
insight
Melissa.
there.
Appreciate it.
Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez still celebrating Amazon's decision to ditch plans for new headquarters in New York City. During a weekend speech in the Bronx, Ocasio-Cortez said New Yorkers deserve dignified jobs and shouldn't have to settle for, quote, scraps. But New York Congressman Peter King disagrees with that analysis.
This is a disaster, an absolute disaster. That's almost now like putting a sign up that you can't do business in New York. Nothing is ever perfect, but in this case, this was as close to it as you're going to get. If Joe Crowley was still a congressman, it wouldn't have happened. So as the leader of the Democratic Party in New York, Andrew Cuomo's got to stand up to these people. He's got to tell the progressive left they cannot take over his party. They cannot take over the city and the state, which is what's happening.
David Lee Miller joins us now with more. These were scrap jobs. They were good salaries.
Some say it was very significant. But what we've got here, Melissa, is two members of Congress offering two very different perspectives on Amazon changing plans to open its headquarters in New York City. What Republican Congressman Peter King describes, as we just heard, as a disaster, the newly elected Democratic Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez sees as a victory. Now, speaking Saturday at a ceremony at a local school, Ocasio-Cortez never mentioned Amazon by name, but it was clear she was talking about the internet retailing giant when she did mention unacceptable jobs.
We need to create dignified jobs in New York City, jobs that pay well, jobs that contribute to community, jobs that are part of a moral economy.
Ocasio-Cortez and her supporters rejected the deal for a number of reasons, including $3 billion in tax breaks. Congressman Peter King fired back during a radio interview, saying revenue from Amazon would have improved the area's overall economy.
I mean, think of and then the working people, the bartenders, the waiters, the people who benefit from this, the cab drivers. And for what? I mean, this whole phony argument that they're getting $3 billion in incentives, hey, that was all negotiated.
Meanwhile, New York's Democratic Mayor Bill de Blasio pointed the finger at Amazon for not being willing to have a meaningful discussion with critics.
No, let's be clear. No one chased away. This was Amazon's arbitrary decision.
And what does Amazon have to say about all this? Well, a spokesman for the company says Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez is invited to tour Amazon's facilities and to see for herself how the company treats employees. The company says it offers excellent pay and benefits from the first day on the job. And you might recall, Melissa, that in Greek mythology, Amazons are strong, powerful women. So arguably what we have here is one Amazon taking on another.
Oh, my goodness. David Lee Miller, thank you. Meanwhile, Fox News has learned that Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos briefly considered buying the National Enquirer's parent company for $1 billion and closing down the tabloid after it exposed his extramarital affair, but he and his confidants ultimately deemed it too risky. Bezos has accused the National Enquirer of trying to blackmail him after it obtained some intimate photos, allegations the tabloid CEO David Pecker has denied. With an already packed primary field, Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders inch closer to announcing their 2020 bids. We'll discuss the impact they...
The America I see values basic human decency, not snatching children from their parents or turning our back on refugees at our border. Americans know that's not right. The American people understand, please, because it makes us embarrassing.
Former Vice President Joe Biden appearing to inch closer to jumping into the already crowded 2020 Democratic primary field, slamming President Trump's treatment of European allies at a security conference over the weekend, among other things. Meantime, Senator Bernie Sanders also getting close, reportedly filming a 2020 campaign announcement. So what impact would they have on the race? Joining me now is Boston Globe political reporter James Pindell. Thank you so much for joining us. First of all, a lot is made of both of these gentlemen's age. I know it was last time around when we were having the same conversation about 2016. Is that a factor? It's not like President Trump's a spring chicken.
True. Among the Democrats, it may be a factor. I mean, as you know, we're in a moment of generational change when Democrats are looking to much younger people, looking to see what's fresh and what's new. You know, this election takes place basically after the Clintons almost totally controlled the Democratic Party for a generation. So now people are wanting to see what's sort of fresh, and they are looking younger. But at the same time, you know, those leading the polls are people like Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders, who are up there. And what Democrats really want right now is to win. And if either one of those guys can make that argument that they're the one who can beat Trump, I guess it's going to be better for them in the primary.
No, I mean, it is a really interesting point that with the Clintons going off the scene, all of a sudden there's been this explosion of candidates that's come out. And I'm sure it's very healthy for the party to kind of look into every corner. But appealing to young people doesn't necessarily mean that the candidate has to be young himself. I mean, that was one of the most surprising things about Bernie Sanders' appeal the last time around, was that his following was very young. They liked his ideas. Who do you think he would be the biggest threat to? I mean, who would he take away from Bernie Sanders?
In terms of the Democratic primary? Yeah, look, this is a contest right now that you can see where we're not quite sure where the lanes are, if there's an establishment lane, if there's a moderate lane, or everyone else jumping in the left wing lane. But certainly a person like Bernie Sanders is going to have to contend with Elizabeth Warren. This may really come to a head in New Hampshire. They're both neighboring senators from states, obviously neighboring states. And ideologically, of course, they are very much aligned when it comes to a lot of the income inequality or the economic populism issues. They may differ when it comes to foreign policy or other topics, but that's really where he's really going to take away from Elizabeth Warren, or he's really going to be threatened by her.
Yeah. And looking at Joe Biden, he's somebody, a lot of people say, boy, he's tried so many times before and he hasn't gotten it done. So why would it be different this time? Maybe does he fit a niche that doesn't exist right now on that side? I mean, is there somebody who's more moderate or is possibly more appealing on a national scale across party lines once you got out of the primary?
Well, look, you're going to look at folks like Michael Bloomberg, who clearly was a Republican and was an independent, who will be making the argument. He will have much more crossover appeal. But right now in the polling, again, this is basically largely name ID. It has nothing to do with really the fact of where people stand on positions. But Democrats do know who Joe Biden is, of course, and they do think that he poses currently the best shot to beat Donald Trump. Now, you know, when Joe Biden's looked at this running for president every time since 1980, he largely lacked two major things. It wasn't really name ID, particularly in 2008. It was he had an inability to raise money, and he had an inability to create a political infrastructure. And he may feel that right now he can do both. But I remind you, he wasn't able to in 2016 when Hillary Clinton inherited the Obama infrastructure and the money. And I'm not so sure he can do it right now either.
Interesting. Well, we will watch. James Pindell, thank you. Appreciate it. Former Democratic Congressman Anthony Weiner, now released from federal prison after serving 15 months behind bars. Weiner was originally ordered to serve 21 months in prison for sexting with a minor. He'll now serve out his remaining months at a halfway house in New York City. Weiner is scheduled for a full release in May. The fight over President Trump's national emergency declaration ramping up amid continued backlash and legal challenges. But could the Trump campaign use the border wall showdown to its advantage in 2020? We will talk about that with the president's former special assistant, Mark Lott. British lawmakers coming down hard on Facebook today, accusing the social media giant in a scathing report of intentionally violating privacy and anti-competition laws in the United Kingdom. The report also calls for greater oversight on social media companies. Greg Palcott is live in London with more. Greg.
Tough words from UK politicians about Facebook, Melissa. Digital gangsters. I think that's about as tough as you can get. This is a culmination of an 18-month-long report study by a UK Parliament committee saying the Facebook corporate structure is designed to, quote, conceal knowledge of responsibility and specific decisions regarding fake news, disinformation, and the wrongful targeting of data and users, particularly slammed, Melissa, the Facebook CEO, Mark Zuckerberg. They said he failed to show leadership and personal responsibility. Remember, he showed up before a congressional hearing last year. He refused to come over here to the UK to speak before this parliamentary committee. The probe was spurred on also last year by word that this UK-based firm, Cambridge Analytica, was misusing Facebook data for the Trump campaign. But there was questions also about Russian meddling in the Brexit campaign, for example, here, and other election campaigns. The study doesn't target exactly what laws to be put in place, but mentioned some guidelines. There's already pretty tough digital privacy rules here in the UK and the EU, rules that are also being looked at right now by the US. Also efforts to politicize the digital cyberspace being looked at on both sides of the pond. As for Facebook, we got a bit of a reaction to today's release from the committee. They say they share the committee's concerns about false news and election integrity, and they say they are open to meaningful regulation. There could be more coming again from the UK and the US in what could be another tough year for the tech giants in 2019. Back to you, Melissa.
Greg Palcott, thank you. The White House defending President Trump's national emergency declaration amid fierce backlash, while the president's 2020 campaign is using it to galvanize supporters. The Washington Post pointing out that Trump's team is already fundraising over his border wall showdown with Democrats. Let's bring in Mark Lotter, former special assistant to President Trump, former press secretary for Vice President Pence, and member of the Trump 2020 Advisory Board. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks,
so
Melissa.
Is that true? Is it already a fundraising issue for the Trump campaign?
Well, you often send out fundraising emails touting the president's accomplishments and things that he's doing to fight with Democrats and actually to deliver on the things he promised he was going to deliver to the American people.
Yeah. I wonder if when you're creating strategy and you sit there and he says, he lays out how he thinks the court's going to challenge it and it's going to go to this circuit and then it's going to go to the Supreme Court and we'll win. Do you worry that that galvanizes the left because it puts that focus on the Supreme Court and how important it is to have your president in office so that you can nominate judges?
Well, I think when you look at the Democrats, their radicalized base is always radicalized. They wake up every morning that President Trump is in office and they are against that. Anything that he says, does, or believes in. So I'm not worried about it energizing the left. What it will do, though, is it will be another example of the president delivering on the promises he made. And that's really, it's not immigration. I mean, if you paid attention to the 2016 campaign, that was one part of the president's argument. It was about fighting for American jobs, fighting for American workers, ending bad deals that put us at a disadvantage on the international stage. He delivered on those promises. He's going to highlight that in 2020, the things that he's delivered, the 5.3 million jobs. Yeah. But he's also going to talk about where he wants to go in the future. That's what this is going to be about.
So people make the argument, though, that a move like this is great for President Trump with his base, but it alienates those people in the margin who feel like it's a bridge too far, it's presidential overreach to declare that national emergency that he had. You know, it's only that one piece of money that he gets from the national emergency. And this shows just sort of that going too far and alienates people in the middle. How do you respond to that?
That puts the pressure on us to better communicate. Look, when President Clinton called it a national emergency about conflict diamonds being imported from Africa or investment in Angola being a national emergency, I don't disagree with either of those decisions, but was it an actual threat to our nation or its citizens? No, it was the right political action or the right policy decision to make. So the use of a national emergency is a legal mechanism to be able to get the things done that we need to get done, and that's what the president is doing.
But in the way that you just said that, you know, when you say, is it a threat, it makes it sound like, you know, all of the people that are coming over the border are a threat to our security. I understand the drugs and the mules and the drug trafficking and those that are coming with bad intentions, but that sets up the president to then be next to pictures of people who are trying to immigrate here because they either want a better life or because they are facing insecurity back home. And to say those people are a threat, you know, makes the president sound hostile and again hurts for those folks in the middle.
Well, one of the things the president has said multiple times and in many addresses is that we need more legal immigration to our country. As you know, we have more available jobs right now than we do unemployed people for the first time in the history of our country.
No, you don't have to convince me. What could he do to show that? Because he said that during the State of the Union, which was great. I want more people to come here than ever before. I just want them to do it the right way. What action could he take that would show that he means that? Because people doubt that he means that.
Well, I think he can continue to call on Congress because it's going to be up to Congress to change those immigration laws. And that's something presidents of both parties have called for and Congress has refused to do.
No, that's true. They need to do their job. Mark Lotter, thank you.
Thank you.
A stunning twist in the alleged hate crime against Empire actor Jussie Smollett. Now Chicago police say they no longer consider him a victim in the case and want to interview him again. We have a live report ahead. A vigil held in Aurora, Illinois yesterday for the victims of Friday's deadly shooting at Henry Pratt Company. 5 crosses were laid in front of the manufacturing facility, one for each of the victims, who were all employees at the facility, including an intern who was on his first day there. At least 11 others were hurt, including 5 police officers. The alleged gunman was shot to death by police at the scene. New developments in the investigation into the alleged hate crime against Empire actor Jussie Smollett. Chicago police say they no longer consider him a victim in the case and are seeking a follow-up interview. Mike Tobin is live in Chicago with the latest. Mike.
Hi there, Melissa. Smollett's team just issued a statement a short time ago saying that he will not submit to this follow-up interview police are requesting from him, at least not today. The statement says Smollett's lawyers are maintaining an active dialogue with police on his behalf, and they will issue no further public statements today. Now, over the weekend, police said Smollett is no longer considered a victim. Police stopped short of saying that he is a suspect involved in a hoax. What police did say is that they've got new information and want to bring Smollett in for more questioning. This follows police detaining and interrogating 2 brothers from Nigeria. The official sources say the 2 men cooperated. The anonymous police sources said the 2 men were paid by Smollett to stage the attack. They even rehearsed it. Police have things like a receipt for a rope that was allegedly put around Smollett's neck. The official sources said the evidence developed through their interrogation was enough to let the 2 brothers go.
Innocence prevailed, all right? My guys are walking home. They're not charged. They are not suspects in this case.
Did Jussie Smollett set this up?
You know, there's still a lot of moving parts to this.
Well, police have been communicating today, but for the most part, they're just repeating this statement that they've got new information and they want to bring Smollett in for more questioning. And now we hear from the PR team that that's not going to happen today. Melissa?
All right, let's bring in Ted Williams, former Washington, D.C. Police detective. Thank you so much for joining us. What do you make of this right now?
Well, let me just say this. Let me give you a Ted Williams news alert. Jussie Smollett will never go in for another interview with law enforcement. It didn't take a rocket scientist to know that there was something significantly smelly about this whole incident. On January the 29th at around 2:30 in the morning, he's coming from a Subway where he went to get some food, and he hears 2 guys saying "Empire, Empire," and they attack him and they say "Make America Great" or use that kind of language and put a noose around his neck. He goes to the hospital with a noose around his neck. This smelled from the beginning, Melissa, and then what they found were these 2 Nigerian brothers. And they left the country, by the way, the day after this incident. They came back into the country. Law enforcement officers, I believe, initially separated them. They got confessions probably from both of these guys, and they're now using these guys in the grand jury against this guy, Jussie.
So you say he'll never go in for another interview. Can he avoid that?
Oh, absolutely, because if it was an interview, yes. But what has happened is he's now moved from being a victim to a suspect. And once you become a suspect, you're advised of your Miranda rights. And at that time, you do not have to make any further statements.
Yeah. What do you think comes of this? I mean, I don't know what kind of charges he could face in the area if he did make it up. Do you think that, they would go that far to go after him at that point?
Oh, absolutely. You can expect that the Chicago Police Department will throw the book at this guy if the evidence is presented. And that is that he would be looking at lying during the course